Sheriff Gideon Crowe held Clara Whitaker's glass photograph over the courthouse stove and said, "Burn it, or I will burn your whole studio with it." The negative was no larger than a man's hand. It looked black, but Clara knew what lived inside its silver shadows. A crowded town square, a courthouse clock, a murdered deputy who was still alive 15 minutes after the sheriff claimed he had died, and Caleb Thorn, the cowboy, chained in the next room, standing nowhere near the place of the killing. Crowe extended the plate toward her. "Your choice, Miss Whitaker." Clara's fingers closed around the cool glass. Her heart was hammering, but her hand did not shake. "No, Sheriff. It is yours." His mouth lifted. "I knew you would be reasonable. The choice is yours," she said. "You can put that plate down, or you can destroy evidence in front of 12 witnesses." Only then did Crowe look past her. The courtroom doors stood open. Ranch wives, shopkeepers, 2 railmen, and the murdered deputy's mother had gathered in the hall. They had heard every word. The sheriff's smile vanished, but 3 days earlier, when Clara first pressed the shutter in the town square, she had believed she was taking nothing more dangerous than a Founder's Day photograph. Clara Whitaker had come to Red Mesa, New Mexico territory, with 1 brass lens, 24 dry plates, and enough money to rent a narrow storefront for 6 weeks. She was 34, soft and full-figured, with warm brown eyes, chestnut hair pinned in a thick braided crown, and the patient hands of a woman who had spent half her life asking light to hold still. Her father had taught her photography in St. Louis. He had also taught her that a portrait was not a face. It was a promise to look carefully. After he died, creditors sold his studio, his painted backdrops, and every camera except the walnut field camera Clara had hidden beneath her bed. She carried it west in a padded trunk. She meant to earn enough in Red Mesa to buy a permanent studio before winter. The sign above her rented room read, "Whitaker Portraits," in neat gold letters. Beneath it, in smaller paint, she had added, "Families, horses, honest work." That last phrase brought Caleb Thorn through her door. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin, dark hair curling at his collar, and a scar crossing one eyebrow. His worn black hat stayed in both hands. Men in Red Mesa called him dangerous because he had once broken a rustler's jaw. Children called him Mr. Caleb because he fixed their stirrups without charging. He placed $2 silver on Clara's counter. "I need a picture of a saddle." Clara looked over the camera cloth. "Not the horse? Just the saddle." The saddle sat outside on a bay gelding. One fender carried a repeating rawhide stitch, 3 short, 2 long. Caleb explained that stolen cattle had been turning up with saddles marked that way, and Deputy Bell needed a record before the rustlers cut it out. Clara glanced at her rent ledger. "1 plate. If Bell does not pay, I sell him a saddle portrait for Christmas." Caleb smiled. Outside, he held the gelding steady and offered help only when she asked. That was the first thing she noticed about him. He did not confuse help with permission. She slid the plate holder into place, removed the dark slide, and counted the exposure beneath her breath. Caleb watched the street instead of her. Across the square, Deputy Thomas Bell came out of the courthouse carrying a red oilskin envelope under his arm. Bell was young for a deputy, barely 30. With spectacles, he was forever pushing up his nose. He crossed toward them in a hurry. "Did you get it?" he asked. "I photographed a saddle," Clara said. "Whether I got your secret code depends on whether Mr. Thorn can keep a horse from sneezing." Bell managed a thin laugh. Then he lowered his voice. "Develop it today. Keep the plate somewhere safe." Caleb studied him. "What happened?" Bell glanced toward the courthouse. Sheriff Crowe stood at an upstairs window, his silver badge catching the light. "Nothing I can prove, yet." "Tom." "After the celebration," Bell said. He gripped the red envelope tighter. "If I am wrong, I have slandered a good man. If I am right, the saddle is the smallest piece of it." He hurried away before either could question him. Clara replaced the dark slide. "He looked frightened." "He is," Caleb said, and Tom Bell does not frighten easy. At noon, Sheriff Crowe commissioned one grand photograph of the Founders Day crowd at 3 o'clock. He was a handsome man of 50 with silver at his temples and the polished manners of someone who liked gratitude more than truth. After praising Clara's camera, he judged her full figure with a slow glance. "A large apparatus for a lady to drag around," he said. Clara met his eyes. "It is fortunate I am not a small lady." Caleb hid a smile. Crowe ordered her to keep the clock and courthouse in frame, then paid $5, enough for her rent and chemicals. When he left, Caleb said, "You should have charged him extra for finding his good side." Clara laughed, and he looked at her as if laughter were another kind of light. At 10 minutes before 3, Clara carried her field camera into the square. Red Mesa had hung bunting between the Mercantile and courthouse. Children waved paper flags. Ranch families crowded behind a rope line. The courthouse clock had been repaired that morning, and Mr. Weller, the clockmaker, kept announcing that it would strike the hour more accurately than the railroad. Clara chose a position beside the fountain. The afternoon sun fell from the west, bright enough for a short exposure. She checked the clock against the telegraph office regulator through its open doorway. Both showed 2:57. Caleb appeared carrying her plate case. "You said the camera was balanced. You said nothing about this box." "That box is my livelihood." "Then I am charging you one portrait." "Of a saddle?" "Of me, so my mother can stop telling people I have gone feral." Clara looked up at him. "Sit still for 5 seconds and I may make you respectable." "That sounds beyond the limits of your equipment." Before she could answer, a little boy darted beneath the rope to retrieve a wooden horse. A wagon team shied at the bunting. One wheel struck Clara's tripod. Caleb moved faster than thought. He caught the center brace with one hand and swept the boy against his leg with the other. Clara seized the camera before it pitched forward. The crowd gasped, then laughed in relief. The courthouse clock began to strike 3. Clara saw the composition assemble itself. Caleb remained beside the camera, one hand on the tripod, the child clinging to his coat. Behind him, citizens turned toward the lens. At the upstairs courthouse window, Sheriff Crowe and Deputy Bell faced one another in sharp profile. Bell still carried the red envelope. "Do not move," Clara called. She pushed the plate holder home, pulled the slide, and released the shutter. On the third bell, a rifle cracked from the livery alley. People screamed and scattered. Clara closed the shutter by instinct. Caleb shoved the child behind the stone fountain and placed himself between Clara and the alley. Another shot punched through the bunting above them. "Stay down," he said. "My plate." "Clara, if light reaches it, the image is gone." Caleb's jaw tightened. He did not order her back. He covered her with his body while she replaced the dark slide and pulled the holder free. Then he took her arm and moved her behind the fountain. The gunfire stopped. Sheriff Crowe came running from the courthouse, revolver in hand. "Bell is down," he shouted. "Deputy Bell has been shot in a livery." Clara stared toward the upstairs window. It was empty. That was impossible. She had seen Bell there when the clock began striking. The livery stood across the square and half a block south. No man could leave that room, cross the courthouse, pass through the crowd, and reach the livery between the first bell and the rifle shot. Caleb seemed to make the same calculation. "I just saw him upstairs." Crowe turned. "You saw nothing." Then a stable boy ran from the alley, white-faced and sobbing. "Mr. Bell is dead. Mr. Caleb's rifle is beside him. Every eye in the square moved to Caleb. His rifle should have been in the scabbard on his saddle. The bay gelding was tied near the livery. Crowe raised his revolver. "Caleb Thorn, put your hands where I can see them." Caleb looked at Clara. Behind the fountain, the little boy still gripped his coat. Clara held the exposed plate against her chest. "I was here," Caleb said. "Ask 50 people. 50 people were running when the shot came. Your rifle was found with the body. And Deputy Bell was alive in your office at 3. Something passed through Crowe's eyes. Not grief, not surprise. Calculation. He stepped forward with iron cuffs. Caleb could have resisted. Every person in Red Mesa knew it. Instead, he lifted his hands. "Do not break her camera," he said. Crowe snapped the cuffs closed. Still playing protector. Caleb's gaze stayed on Clara. "Develop the plate." The sheriff heard him. For one moment, the entire square went silent. Then Crowe smiled and told the crowd that grief made men say foolish things. Clara carried the plate to her darkroom, while Deputy Bell's body was taken to the undertaker. She locked the door, drew the black curtain, and lit the ruby lamp. Her hands knew the sequence even while her mind rebelled against it. Developer, gentle rocking, water rinse, fixer. An image rose slowly from the glass. The square appeared in reversed tones, pale faces, black sky, white coats where darkness should be. Clara leaned close, breath held. Caleb stood at the tripod with the child under his arm. The courthouse clock read 3. At the upstairs window, 2 figures faced each other. One was Sheriff Crowe, the other was Deputy Bell. The photograph did not show a murder, it showed a lie. A knock struck the front door. "Miss Whitaker!" Crowe called. "Open up!" Clara slid the wet plate into a drying rack behind 3 blank panes. She wiped her hands, opened the darkroom curtain, and let him in. The sheriff no longer wore his public smile. "You took a photograph when the shots were fired." "Just before." "The council owns that plate." "The council bought 1 print. I retain the negative." "Do not play contracts with me. A deputy is dead." "Then you should want every accurate record." His gaze traveled to the darkroom. Was Bell in the picture? Clara waited 1 breath too long. Crowe stepped closer. "Glass breaks easily. Studios burn easily. A woman alone in a new town should understand how quickly misfortune happens." Fear moved through Clara, clean and cold. She thought of her rent, her father's camera, the 6 weeks of hope painted above the door. Then she thought of Caleb, lifting his hands because a child stood behind him. "The plate is still washing," she lied. "If you open the darkroom now, you may ruin what the council paid for." Crowe studied her face. At last he put his hat on. "Bring it to my office at sunset." "And if I do not?" "You will lose more than a photograph." When he left, Clara locked the door. She made a contact print while the negative remained damp, pressing sensitized paper against the glass beneath a lamp. The clock and window figures could be seen. Then she examined the plate with a magnifier. On Deputy Bell's coat was a pale slash where the red oilskin envelope reflected sunlight. In Crowe's hand was something small and bright, a cuff button, perhaps, or a key. At the edge of the frame, the telegraph office doorway showed its regulator clock. 3 o'clock there as well. 2 clocks. 1 dead man alive. 1 accused man in the square. It should have been enough, but Clara had learned from her father that a photograph could be honest and still be misunderstood. A plate recorded light, not motive. It could place a man in one spot, but it could not explain who moved a rifle or who fired the shot. She needed corroboration. Clara carried the contact print to the jail beneath her shawl. Ruth Pike, Bell's aunt, and the night jailer gave her 5 minutes. Caleb rose from his cell as Clara unfolded the faint image between the bars. "Tom was alive at 3, he said. "Crowe says he found the body at 2:45. The 2 clocks prove the timeline is false, but not who killed Bell." Caleb pointed to the pale envelope on Bell's coat. Tom had been investigating cattle routes sold to rustlers. Ranchers, the railroad agent, and the sheriff all had access. Clara told him Crowe had asked whether Bell appeared in the picture before she said he did. Then she described the threat to her studio. "Give him the plate," Caleb said. "No. Your life is attached to it. Mine, not yours. You do not decide which risks belong to me." Caleb lowered his head. "You are right. I am sorry. Tell me what you need." She needed the true time, proof his rifle had not fired, and Bell's envelope. Caleb sent her to gunsmith Mateo Ruiz, who had marked the rifle's firing housing with chalk. As Ruth ended the visit, Caleb asked Clara to choose her life if Crowe forced the choice. Through the bars, the dangerous cowboy looked afraid only for her. Mateo Ruiz had inspected Caleb's rifle before Crowe sealed it. The barrel smelled of oil, not powder, and Mateo's chalk line remained whole. Fearful for his pregnant wife and his license, he would not yet testify, but Clara persuaded him to seal a written statement. The telegraph log confirmed a federal time signal at 3. Mr. Weller confirmed he had set the courthouse clock against it at noon. By sunset, Clara had 2 clocks, a federal log, Mateo's statement, and the plate. She did not have the red envelope. Sheriff Crowe arrived before she could decide where to hide the negative. He brought a court order declaring the Founders Day plate property of Red Mesa. The paper carried Judge Lyle's signature, but the ink was still wet, and the wording gave Crowe possession only after a print had been delivered. Clara read it twice. "You may have the council's print tomorrow." "I will have the plate now." "The order does not say that." He stepped past her. Clara blocked the darkroom door. She was shorter than he was and far softer in outline, but the doorway fit her planted stance better than it fit his authority. Crowe's face hardened. "Do not make your size the only thing between me and my duty. My size has carried this camera across 3 territories. It can hold a doorway." For a moment, neither moved. Then Crowe reached around her and tore the dark curtain from its hooks. Evening light flooded the room. Clara cried out. 3 unused plates lay exposed on the work table. Crowe swept them to the floor with his forearm. Glass shattered around her boots. The real negative was no longer there. Before opening the door, Clara had slipped it into the back panel of her walnut camera, where her father once hid emergency money. Crowe searched the drying rack and found a ruined test plate. He held it toward the lamp, saw only fogged gray, and believed her evidence destroyed. "You should have been reasonable," he said. He walked out, leaving broken glass and chemical stains across the floor. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then she locked the door and leaned both hands on the counter. Her knees began to shake. Courage did not feel like courage after the danger passed. It felt like sickness. It felt like wanting someone to come back and tell you that you had not imagined the threat. A quiet knock came from the rear alley. "Miss Whitaker?" Ruth whispered. "It is me." Ruth entered carrying Deputy Bell's coat. "Gideon told the undertaker to burn this with the blood linens. Tom's mother asked me to save it." One silver cuff button was missing from the deputy's sleeve. In the inside pocket, Clara found a streak of red oilskin wax, but no envelope. Ruth sat heavily. "Tom came to the jail yesterday. He said if anything happened, I should look where no sheriff ever thinks to kneel. I thought he was making a joke." "Where were you standing? Beside the stove?" Clara and Ruth looked at the iron stove in the jail office through the rear window across the alley. Caleb was still locked inside. Crowe would return for the night count in less than an hour. The envelope might be beneath the stove. Clara could preserve the plate and wait for a territorial marshal. The next stage arrived in 2 days. That was the safe choice. But Crowe had already destroyed her work and believed the negative gone. If he found Bell's list before morning, the remaining proof could vanish. Clara placed the hidden plate inside a padded box. "Take this to the telegraph operator. Tell him to lock it in the railroad safe." Ruth stared. "What will you do?" "Go where no sheriff thinks to kneel." Ruth admitted Clara through the jail's rear door. Clara knelt beside the iron stove, reached beneath its warm belly, and found the red envelope just as Crowe's boots struck the porch. She pushed it through Caleb's bars. When Crowe entered, Clara said she had been praying with the prisoner. Caleb hid the envelope beneath his boot while Crowe searched the cell. As Crowe forced Clara toward the door, he caught her elbow. Caleb struck the bars. "Take your hand off her!" Clara held the sheriff's gaze. "You have 2 witnesses." Crowe released her. 5 minutes later, Ruth passed the envelope through the rear drain inside Caleb's washcloth. Bell's list named 6 stolen cattle drives. Beside each was the route departure time, and a payment marked GC. The final page carried Sheriff Crowe's full signature beneath a receipt for $100 from Amos Vane, a known rustler. It was strong evidence, but not enough by itself. Crowe could call the signature a forgery. Bell had written a note beneath it, original receipt in dispatch ledger, page 84. The dispatch ledger belonged in the sheriff's locked evidence cabinet. The key, Clara realized, was the bright object in Crowe's hand in the photograph, but Deputy Bell had a wax impression of that key smeared inside his coat pocket. He had been preparing to make a duplicate. The missing cuff button was pressed into the wax, leaving a crescent mark. The photograph's smallest detail changed meaning. Bell had not been carrying evidence to Crowe. He had been trying to retrieve evidence Crowe had locked away. At midnight, flames climbed the back wall of Clara's studio. She woke above the burning stairwell, wrapped herself in a wet blanket, seized the walnut camera, and reached the front window. Caleb's voice rose from below. Ruth had released him from the jail to help. Clara lowered the camera, then climbed onto a ladder as the awning cracked. Caleb caught both rails against his shoulder. She descended into his arms, coughing. He set her on her feet at once, keeping only his hands at her shoulders until he knew she could stand. "The plate," she said. "Safe at the railroad office," Ruth answered. The upper window burst outward in sparks. Crowe pushed through the crowd and pointed his revolver at Caleb. Ruth admitted releasing him to save Clara. Caleb could have taken Crowe before the sheriff cleared leather. Everyone knew it. Clara touched his wrist. "Trust the plate." His eyes held hers. Then he knelt in the street and placed both hands behind his head. That was the moment Clara understood what he had risked for her. Not escape. Not freedom. Faith. Crowe put him in chains again and told the crowd Caleb had started the fire during his escape, but 3 townsmen had seen Caleb run straight from the jail to the burning studio. Ruth swore the fire began before she unlocked his cell. The sheriff's story was beginning to split. By dawn, half Clara's studio was black timber and wet ash. The gold letters above the door hung crooked. Families, horses, honest work. Only the last 2 words remained readable. Clara stood in the street wearing Ruth's borrowed blue dress. It fit tightly across her full arms and softly followed her waist, but she had no time to be embarrassed. She pinned her smoke-scented hair into its braided crown and walked to the telegraph office. The plate was safe. So was the contact print. The operator had sent an overnight message to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. The reply said Marshal Ezekiel Ward could not arrive until late afternoon. Crowe planned to take Caleb to a county hearing at noon. The road south crossed Vane's ranch. Caleb would never reach the hearing. Clara had 4 hours. She borrowed a solar enlarger from Mr. Weller, who used it for clock diagrams, and set up a temporary darkroom in the telegraph office storeroom. With the negative projected onto sensitized paper, she made 3 enlarged prints: the courthouse clock, the telegraph regulator, and the upstairs window. The enlargement showed Bell's red envelope clearly. It also showed Crowe's left wrist. His cuff was missing a silver button. The button found pressed into Bell's coat wax was not Bell's. It matched Crowe's shirt. Still, Clara needed the dispatch ledger. Mateo Ruiz arrived with his written statement and an unexpected fact. "Crowe took Caleb's rifle from my cabinet at 2:30, he said. "He returned it after the shooting and ordered me to log it as found at the livery. I refused. That is why he sealed my shop. Will you say it in court?" Mateo looked at the burned studio across the square. "He had his 2 chances. So did I. I am done being quiet." At 11, Crowe dragged Caleb into the courthouse for what he called a public transfer hearing. Judge Lyle sat at the bench, pale and nervous. Crowe had gathered the town hoping ceremony would turn accusation into truth. Clara entered carrying the plate in its padded box. The crowd opened for her. Caleb stood in chains beside the stove. When he saw her, something gentle moved across his face, followed by alarm when he noticed the burns on her sleeve. She gave him the smallest nod. "I am here by choice." Crowe struck the table. This proceeding concerns the transfer of a murder suspect. Miss Whitaker has no standing. She has evidence, Judge Lyle said. Crowe turned on him. You signed the seizure order for a print, not for destruction. Clara placed the enlarged photographs on the evidence table. Murmurs traveled through the room. This image was exposed as the courthouse clock struck 3, she said. The telegraph regulator, visible at the left, received the federal time signal at that same moment. Mr. Weller set the courthouse clock against it at noon. The telegraph operator confirmed his log. Mr. Weller confirmed the clock. Clara pointed to Caleb beside the tripod. Mr. Thorn was in the square at 3. Crowe smiled thinly. No one disputes that. Bell was killed at 2:45. Thorn planted his rifle, returned to the square, and fired into the crowd to confuse pursuit. Then who is standing in your office window? Clara uncovered the enlargement. Deputy Bell's mother made a sound like air leaving a broken bellows. She came forward until her fingertips touched her son's shape on the paper. That is Tom, she whispered. Crowe did not look at her. A blurred figure. It is his coat, Ruth said. I mended that shoulder. And his red envelope, Clara added. The envelope you failed to log after his death. She laid Bell's route list beside the print. Crowe's right hand drifted toward his holster. Caleb saw it. So did Clara. Do not, she said. Crowe looked at her as if she were something small he had finally grown tired of stepping around. Burn the picture. The room went still. What? Judge Lyle asked. Crowe seized the glass negative from its box and moved to the courthouse stove. He lifted the iron lid. Heat rolled into the room. This plate belongs to the council, he said. It has already caused a jailbreak, an arson, and public panic. Miss Whitaker will destroy it now, or I will close her business permanently. Clara walked toward him. Caleb pulled once against the chain. Clara, you do not owe me your future. She looked at him. The whole room heard what he had given her. Not an order, but freedom. Then she faced Crowe. He held the plate over the open stove. Your choice, Miss Whitaker. Clara closed her fingers around the cool glass. No, Sheriff. It is yours. His mouth lifted. I knew you would be reasonable. The choice is yours. You can put that plate down, or you can destroy evidence in front of 12 witnesses. Crowe looked toward the open doors and saw the people gathered there, the telegraph operator, Mr. Weller, Mateo, Ruth, Bell's mother, ranchers whose cattle had vanished, men he could intimidate one at a time, now standing together. His smile disappeared. He let go of the plate. Clara caught it against her palm. Crowe drew his revolver. Caleb moved, but the ankle chain brought him hard against the bench. Clara did not duck. She held the negative upright between herself and the gun, not because glass could stop a bullet, but because every person in the room could see what Crowe had chosen to shoot. Mateo raised a shotgun from the doorway. Ruth lifted the jail keys like a blade. Judge Lyle stood behind the bench. Lower it, Gideon, the judge said. Crowe's revolver wavered. A voice came from the rear of the courtroom. That would be wise. Territorial Marshal Ezekiel Ward had arrived early, dust covering his coat. 2 deputies stood behind him. Crowe swung toward the marshal. You have no warrant. I have a telegraph report of witness intimidation, evidence destruction, unlawful seizure, and attempted murder by arson. I can begin with those. The photograph proves nothing about Bell's killer. Not alone, Clara said. She placed the cuff button enlargement beside the wax from Bell's coat. Mateo testified that Crowe had taken Caleb's unfired rifle before the killing. Ruth presented the route list. The telegraph operator produced his overnight copy, making the names impossible to erase. Marshal Ward searched Crowe under Judge Lyle's authority. In his vest pocket was the key to the evidence cabinet. Its bow carried a crescent nick matching the wax impression in Bell's coat. The cabinet was opened. On page 84 of the dispatch ledger lay the original receipt signed by Crowe and Amos Vane. Tucked behind it was the missing silver cuff button, stained dark at the edge. Crowe had taken it from Bell after their struggle and hidden it with the record he meant to destroy. The undertaker confirmed Bell had been shot at close range from the left. Crowe was the only left-handed man in the upstairs office. A spent revolver cartridge recovered beneath his desk matched the caliber of the wound. No single piece carried the whole truth. Together, they left it nowhere to hide. Crowe stared at Clara across the evidence table. "You ruined this town over a picture!" "No," she said. "I looked carefully." Marshal Ward took Crowe's badge. The sound of the pin sliding free was softer than a shudder. It changed more. Caleb's chains were removed before noon. He did not go after Crowe. He did not strike him, curse him, or make the courtroom another place of fear. He walked first to Deputy Bell's mother and told her that Tom had been brave. Then he crossed to Clara. He stopped an arm's length away. "May I?" he asked, looking at the soot-dark bruise along her forearm. She offered him her hand. His fingers were rough and careful. He turned her wrist only enough to see that the burn was shallow. "You trusted the plate," she said. "I trusted you." Around them, the town began the untidy work of repair. Judge Lyle suspended Crowe's orders. Mateo's shop was reopened. Ruth was appointed temporary jailkeeper by the marshal. Ranchers contributed sworn reports to the territorial case against Amos Vane. Bell's family received his unpaid wages and the reward attached to the Rustler investigation. Justice did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as signatures, returned keys, opened doors, and people finally willing to say what they had seen. Clara's studio could not be saved. The rear wall had collapsed and smoke had ruined every backdrop. She stood in the ashes that afternoon while Caleb lifted a charred beam from her camera trunk. "The lens is whole," he said. "The brass is scorched." "Whole things can carry marks." She looked at the crooked sign. "Honest work" remained above the door. "My lease is gone," she said. "So are most of my plates. I won the truth and lost the place I meant to build a life." Caleb set the beam aside. "What do you want now?" "Not what will you do, not where will you go. What do you want?" Clara looked across the square at the courthouse, where her photograph would one day hang as evidence instead of decoration. "A studio with north light. A darkroom that does not leak. A door no sheriff can kick open without the whole street hearing. There is an empty harness shop beside Mateo's. Thick walls, north windows. The rent is twice what I paid here. The ranchers owe Bell, and Bell trusted your work. Let them commission a record of every recovered herd. You set the price." She studied him. "Is that charity?" "No. It is a contract. You are difficult enough about those that I brought witnesses." Behind him stood 6 ranchers, the telegraph operator and Mr. Weller. Each carried either a deposit or an item to be photographed. Clara laughed, then cried, and hated the crying until Caleb quietly turned his back on the others to give her privacy without leaving. She caught his sleeve. "Stay." He did. For the next month, Red Mesa rebuilt Whitaker portraits. Clara chose every shelf, lock, and pane of north glass. Caleb hauled lumber when she asked and disappeared when she did not. He built a steel-lined plate cabinet and handed her the only key. "No copy?" she asked. "Your door, your work, your key." That was his romance before either of them named it. Clara photographed recovered cattle brands, Bell's mother holding her son's badge, and Mateo beneath his reopened sign. Every image became part of Red Mesa's memory, but none belonged to the town until Clara chose to sell it. Caleb came for his promised portrait on the first Sunday in October. He wore a clean white shirt, a black vest, and the expression of a man facing execution. Clara arranged him beside a plain gray backdrop. "Sit naturally." "This is natural." "You look as if you swallowed a fence post." "You told me not to move." She stepped closer to adjust his collar. Caleb said that when she asked him to trust the plate, he had thought she meant evidence. Later he understood she was asking him to believe he could be seen clearly and not condemned. "Crowe saw a man useful to blame," he said. You saw where I stood, what I did, and who I protected. That is my profession. No, that is your gift. His gaze held her face, her full figure in the fitted burgundy dress, and the hands that had carried glass through fire. He looked the way she had always wanted a camera to look, carefully, honestly, without apology. Clara, he said, I would like to court you. Slowly, if that is what you want. Publicly, if that makes you feel safe. Privately, if the town has had enough of our business. She smiled. The town will never have enough of our business. Then I will learn patience. You already have. She took his hand and placed it at her waist. 5 seconds, Mr. Thorn. Try to look respectable. He looked at her instead of the lens. Clara opened the shutter. They did court, slowly. Caleb rode in from the North Range twice a week, sometimes with flowers, more often with broken buckles or a child whose family wanted a portrait but could not pay. Clara charged him in fence repairs and coffee. He never negotiated her prices for anyone else. In December, Marshal Ward returned to say Gideon Crowe and Amos Vane had been indicted for murder, conspiracy, cattle theft, arson, and evidence tampering. Mateo's testimony and the dispatch ledger would carry the criminal case. Clara's photograph would establish the false timeline. Crowe would face a court, not a mob. Clara was glad. Truth had demanded enough fire. On Christmas Eve, the town unveiled the Founders' Day photograph in the courthouse hall. Not the grand print Crowe had imagined, but a carefully framed enlargement with a brass plaque honoring Deputy Thomas Bell. In the foreground stood Caleb, one hand holding Clara's tripod, the other shielding a child. Behind him, the clock marked the minute a lie began to fail. Clara stood beside Bell's mother as the cloth was lifted. Caleb remained at the back of the crowd until Clara reached for him. She led him forward openly. Your mother asked for a respectable portrait, she whispered. Did you send her one? I sent the picture where you are looking at me, he winced. Then she knows everything. Mothers usually do. Snow began outside, soft against the courthouse windows. Caleb took a small brass object from his pocket. Clara recognized the scorched lens cap from her father's camera, polished until the old initials shone again. Inside it, he had fitted a narrow silver ring. He did not kneel in front of the town. He knew she did not want her answer turned into public entertainment. He waited until they stood in the quiet doorway of her new studio, beneath the sign she had repainted herself. Families, horses, honest work. I am not asking because you saved me, he said. A debt is not a marriage. I am asking because you tell the truth even when it costs you, because you make room for frightened people to become brave, and because every place feels more honest when you are in it. Clara looked at the ring, then at him. And if I say I need time? I will come back Tuesday with coffee and a broken buckle. What if I say yes? His voice caught. I will still come Tuesday. She slipped the ring onto her finger. Then come Tuesday, Caleb, and every Tuesday after that. He kissed her only after she lifted her face. It was gentle, warm, and unhurried. A promise with no audience but the camera in the window and snow settling over Red Mesa. Years later, people would say Clara Whitaker's photograph proved an innocent cowboy had not murdered Deputy Bell. That was true, but incomplete. The picture proved where Caleb had been standing. Clara proved what it meant. And in the home above Whitaker Portraits, beside the scorched brass lens in the first portrait of Caleb trying not to smile, hung one small contact print of a crowded square at 3 o'clock. Whenever their children asked why the glass was cracked at one corner, Clara told them the truth. Whole things can carry marks, she said, and careful eyes can still see what matters.